size of it. It's unreasonable to have a professor that lives far away.
Can you bring another chair back there?
Oh, yeah.
You take them on your camera? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay.
Do you like to open it up? Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming out tonight and welcome to Zibby's Bookshop. So we have Hope Edelman and Laurel Braitman and we're celebrating the launch of what looks like Bravery, so congratulations Laurel.
Thank you.
And it's going to be about 30 minutes of conversation between the two of them, followed by audience Q&A and then book signing. So whenever you're ready, we'll go right ahead.
Hello, everybody. Can we just give a hand to Laurel?
Oh, God.
I've been writing books for almost 30 years and it doesn't get any easier. In fact, it just gets harder with the publishing industry and what's asked of us as authors. And it feels like a huge accomplishment these days to birth a book into being. So congratulations, a marvelous book. If you haven't read it yet, you are in for such a treat. I'm thrilled to be here today to be in conversation with Laurel to talk about her memoir and her personal history, which is just as interesting as any that I've come across, and I read a lot of memoirs. My name's Hope Edelman. I am a bereavement expert and an author, and I'm the author of Motherless Daughters, Motherless Mothers, the co-founder of Motherless Daughters Retreats, the founder of motherlessdaughters.com. I offer services to women who lose mothers when they're young, but I also work with any adult who was bereaved when they were young. And as you're about to learn, if you don't already know, Laurel has written and given a lot of thought to what the death of her father when she was a teenager meant to the arc of her adult life. And we're going to be talking about that today, in addition to talking about the book. So Laurel is an incredibly accomplished writer and academic. She has a PhD from MIT. She's the director of the writing and storytelling program. Is that what is correct? At the Stanford Medical School.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what that is and what that involves? Because I'm so intrigued, like why a medical school would have a writing and storytelling program. Is it like narrative medicine at Columbia? Because that's a very famous program.
It is, and it's one I admire very much. As far as I understand it, and narrative medicine is a lot of text-based analysis, literary theory. How does this text apply to my life? I would say I'm a lot more pedestrian in terms of what I teach, which is really just helping people tell the stories that are inside of them and reflect on a lot of their experiences as healthcare professionals on a day-to-day basis, and try to find meaning in the hard things that are asked of them in a career where often time for purposeful reflection isn't built into that at all.
Oh, so during the COVID pandemic, during the height of the pandemic, right, we had all these people in the healthcare professions who were watching tragic stories unfold in real time. Did they have any place to put it?
I would say, well, I hope this little community that we started is that. About 2 weeks into the pandemic, I started offering an online virtual workshop for healthcare professionals. And before, I just done it at Stanford, which is like a very well-resourced community. And as soon as everything started happening with COVID, I was like, I actually don't feel ethically comfortable with just offering this to Stanford. But I'd never taught via Zoom. I mean, if you can remember back to like spring 2020, like Zoom was still this weird sort of thing. I think since then, like telemedicine has become a huge, like some people were using Zoom, but nothing like now. And I'd certainly never taught creative writing that way. And so it was sort of like inviting people to a birthday party where you're like, will they come? I have no idea. And so we started like mid-March or beginning of March 2020. And I just put the call out. I didn't even really publicize it, but if any healthcare professional or a loved one of a healthcare professional would like to come and write on a Saturday morning for free for an hour, they should come. And that was like 15,000 people ago. It's been amazing. And we still do it now. I just switched to like a pay what you can kind of model like 6 months ago. And I'd say it's not, we used to have like about 150 people every Saturday, and it's smaller now, but it's no less magical and wonderful. It's just that people now have like, they have to take their kids to a game, or, they have stuff on a Saturday, which thank God, right? Like life is happening on a weekend again. But it was amazing. So that's sort of what I do at Stanford, is basically give people an opportunity that they might not otherwise have, particularly to be vulnerable. Like, I don't know how many of you are healthcare professionals in every crowd I speak to. Okay, thank you. Right? Like, it is a field in which you can be financially and professionally punished for being vulnerable. Talking particularly about a mental health challenge can be something that keeps you from a prestigious fellowship or a residency that you might really want to do. And so there really isn't a culture of vulnerability or talking about the hard stuff. And so in just my tiny little corner, I'd say that's what I'm trying to do, is make it more okay for healthcare professionals to disclose in a empowered way, things that they're thinking about or stuff that they've faced. And so, yeah, that's what I do. Mostly it's like teaching people or helping people, write an op-ed or a novel. Sometimes it's a novel, which help us get at the truth. So yeah, it's a weird, wonderful job. I hope they never realize that I've scammed them. Like, it's a wonderful, crazy thing. And a job that is one of the like craziest things I've ever done, which is walk in there and be like, I think you guys should make me a job. And then they did. They paid me like 5 cents for like a really long time. But they didn't make me a job, which was really cool. So yeah, I don't take it for granted.
And so is it an international community now that it can reach beyond Stanford? There, I imagine there are people all over the world.
We call it writing medicine, and it's actually, that work is a little separate from Stanford. But yeah, it's global. It's cool.
I think about that a lot, because much of the work that I do is with clients who have what I call reactivated grief. Meaning they are either experiencing a loss or witnessing a loss, and it is reactivating pieces of a loss from their past that maybe they weren't able to process at the time or couldn't process until this time in their life. And I thought about that a lot during the COVID pandemic. All the nurses and the doctors and everyone in the ER, all the first responders who were watching, death on a math scale, but also watching families unable to say goodbye or trying to say goodbye, and what that would bring up in them if they had similar experiences in their past.
And the proxy, I think like the goodbye by iPad was particularly tough, because like we weren't doing a lot of thinking about the person who's holding the iPad up to the person that has to say goodbye.
Exactly.
Like we thought a lot about the person and their family, which is very important, obviously, right? But what happens to like when you've done that 15 times in a day or 8 times in a day, and in between that you're triaging who can get care in the parking lot. I think, after like the hospitality industry, healthcare is, like, for lack of a better word, hemorrhaging people because of this. It's not because people like don't find meaning in their work anymore. I think that there was a point where like, there needs to be some mass healing after what we've all been through.
I could talk with you about this forever because I'm so interested, but I want to talk about your book. So let's talk about your book. Laura grew up in what I found to be a completely fascinating and very unusual family. She had parents who grew up, her father in Baltimore, her mother in Beverly Hills. Is that right? And then they became Jewish avocado farmers in Santa Paula. She calls them Ranchy Jews, which I find hilarious.
Parents who hosted something they called breakfasts of the world, where they would dress up and cook food from different countries for their kids at the kitchen, and would sit at the kitchen table and invite her friends to join them. They were beekeepers, they were donkey tamers. It's just such an extraordinary history to draw from. I'm wondering, in what ways do you feel like the environment you grew up in prepared you to be a writer of memoir? Because we all crave that kind of material, but not everybody who has that material actually uses it
Yeah.
in a book.
Good question. I mean, I didn't want to, is the truth. Like, I wrote a memoir kicking and screaming. Like, this is my second book. My first book was like a very serious work of popular science, you know? Like, I had a lot of, I hate to say it, like, I had a lot of shame about writing a memoir, you know? It just felt like, who am I? Like, I've never been hooked on heroin, and I grew up, like, you know, I didn't have to worry about where my next meal came from. I'm a doctor, like a cardiac surgeon, right? It's like, oh, like, where was her hardship? Like, although there was a lot, but I think I had told myself a certain story that, like, I hadn't earned a memoir. And then, like, I don't know, like, I think I had to write that first book, you know, to do this one. Like, I think I wrote my way around it. And I mean, we had a terrible fire where I have lost everything I cared about except for like one random box of like college papers and some other stuff that truly you would never save in a house fire. And I looked at it, and some of the things that I wrote even as an undergrad were stories about the donkeys and about my parents' funny love affair, and a bit of what I experienced growing up. So I think in a lot of ways I was just like had to wait until I was old enough to feel brave enough, or at least just a what the hell enough to write my own story. But I never thought about myself. I still don't think about myself as a memoir writer.
What is it? Where are we getting the message that in order to like earn a memoir, we have to have a life of hardship? Is it because that's what the publishing industry likes to sort of forefront, or
Maybe, but look at like my year in Tuscany rehabbing a villa. Like, that's not always true, like, right? Like, I know lots of people write pleasant memoirs. I don't know. I think also it was like a story I told myself, which a lot of the book is about, which is like I was proving myself on a ground like no one really set out for me. It was me, you know, and I felt like I had to be rigorous academically and intellectually, and somehow interrogating my own life, even though that's where we all learn to be intellectually rigorous, wasn't somehow good enough. I think it was wrapped up in that, which is a bullshit story a lot of us tell ourselves for a long time.
well, you know, and you're very honest in the book too, that part of the way that you survived the death of your dad, and we'll talk about that in a moment because it was so prolonged, his illness, but part of the way that you survived that was to suppress emotions
Yes.
and tell yourself this isn't such a big deal.
Yeah, nothing to see here. We're blessed. We're fine. We're privileged. Nothing's
not a
wrong.
big deal.
Yeah.
And then so that follows that then you look back at your history and say,
Yes.
that's not a big enough deal to write about or to warrant a memoir.
I'm still doing it all day long, every day. I just can see myself doing it, right? Where I'm like, oh, poor you. You didn't get on the New York Times list your first week. You know what I mean? Like, it just exists in like literally every facet of my life. It's just the difference now, I think, is I can see myself doing it. And I hope, you know, that some of the engine of trying to achieve or trying to work hard isn't coming from trying to prove to myself that I'm good or worthy of love. But that instead it's coming from just wanting pure joy, like just wanting to do the thing, rather than like having it have to be like go into a file, right? Of like the Laurel is good enough file, you know, like, cause that file could never be big enough, right? I just will never reach it. So,
But like so many children who lose a parent or who have no sense of control over a parent's illness, right? Performance becomes really important because that's something we
Yes.
can control.
yes. And it's every superhero movie, right? It's like when you're orphaned in a Marvel comic, like you go on to save the world, right? Like you get a superpower, like you are fine. You know, like your duty, in fact, is to protect humanity. Like, what a crazy thing to like ask of an orphan child, right? There you go.
Only in Marvel.
Go be the
comics.
Green Lantern. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, right, when you become Harry Potter.
Yes,
You're a
yes,
wizard.
yes. I'm still waiting for my owl.
Yeah.
The book centers around your relationship with both of your parents. Exceptional people, but mainly with your father, who's a cardiovascular surgeon. And there's a line in your book that just, I had to stop and sit with it for a moment. You said, we were each other's becoming.
loving one another in direct proportion to how much we fought, a mutual crucible to the death. Your dad comes across in this book as a man who lived his life very much on his own terms. So I was wondering if instead of me telling the audience about him, you could introduce him to the people here about his life and his illness and the impact that it had on the family and how he refused to let that illness slow him down until it had to, because it took a lot from him, I mean, physically and emotionally.
Yeah, my dad was born to like a family of like very moderate means in the Jewish neighborhood of Baltimore, and I think from a very early age wanted to live a big life, and I don't know where those feelings come from and all this, but he did, and he I think also wanted to escape the small community that he grew up in, and I think Ranchy Jew is an apt thing. I think he was kind of interested in like the Marlboro man like vision of masculinity, and but was an intellectual, and moved west and worked here in UCLA for a number of years for his training, and really just like wanted to be a beekeeper, wanted to be an amateur geologist, got his pilot's license with my mom, wanted to rescue donkeys, taught himself how to ranch. And I don't know if part of that is his personality. He was like rapacious, very curious. Part of it too is that he got a terminal diagnosis when he was only 42. And I think he got that diagnosis. He was told he had a 6-month prognosis here in Santa Monica. My mom was pregnant with my younger brother. I was 3.5 years old. And he was terrified. He owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical student loans. We owed a lot of money on the ranch still. My mom wasn't working at the time, and he got really scared. And so he had a leg amputation, and went immediately back to work and just started saving as much money as he could. And also, I think, started living his life in like gulps, like it just turned up the heat and all of the interest that he had already. And I think he felt such an acute sense of time sifting through the hourglass that there was going to be no time to waste. And by extension, the rest of us absorbed that too, which is great. I mean, I credit that with pretty much every great thing that I've enjoyed in my life. Also, it's really exhausting to live every day like you're going to die the next day.
With that sense of urgency.
Yes. So it was the superpower of his, and also I think when you don't die, which he didn't after 6 months, he ended up having 14 years, but we never knew how much time we would have. So we would get these kind of chunks in like 6 weeks between scans, or 6 months, or our longest was 4 years that we went, where he didn't have a recurrence. But often it was much quicker. And so we would like say goodbye and hope for the best, and then he would die or not for the most part. And then we would get another stay. And so that's how we lived. And every time he would get a clear scan, it was a family celebration. It was like, great, what are we going to do? Like, let's drive to Mexico. Like, let's go see a magic show in Vegas. We're leaving at 4 a.m., like that was life. And it was delicious and marvelous. And also, now I'm a little older than he was when he was diagnosed. And this is what a big chunk of the book is about. It's like, well, what happens when you get to be that age and you're not dead? Like what happens?
Yeah.
Like, how do you live with that acute sense of mortality with also like saving for retirement? Like, I truly don't believe I'm going to get old. Like, I should save some money though. Like how do you do that? And so that's been a big challenge of my adult life. That's a lot of what the story of the book is about, is like, how do you live with that anxiety while also preserving the gratitude and the verve and the joy for life? And I wish I had an answer. The book is one long search for an answer. I have parts of the answer, but it's a daily struggle, I'd say.
My mother died at 42. Wasn't it crazy to turn 42 and realize how young that was?
Yes.
Because when we were kids, I was like, oh, she's old. She went to college. She had children. She had a job.
Totally.
It's just all things that seemed so far in the future for me at the time.
It's so true.
And then I was 41, 42, and I thought, oh my God, she only got half a life.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
So
did you have a hard time at like well, you've written a little bit about this at like 43.
Yeah, 43 was harder than 42. 42 was just weird, but 43 was really like, whoa, now I'm older
Yeah.
than my mother? Like, how's that
Yeah,
possible?
what do I do now? There's
She's
no now.
frozen in time. Like, right, exactly. There's no like elder here that I can just imagine would be around to advise me in a way. And
Yeah.
now I'm so much older than she got to be. It's crazy. Like, and I think, of aging as a privilege.
I know.
Really, it's a gift.
My husband,
because
like,
it
teases
wasn't
me
something I
about it
take for,
sometimes.
it's not something I take for
No, I
granted.
can't wait to be an old person. I'm like, I mean, maybe I will move some things. I now live in Southern California. Never say never. But like, I cannot wait to be like an old hag. Like, I truly can't wait. I'm like, no one's gonna shame me about aging. Like, never. Never. I want to be like a grouchy old lady taking up space on the sidewalk. Like, so bad. So bad. So bad. Yeah.
So, I was really moved by your dad's ventures into beekeeping. You mentioned that he really wanted to be a beekeeper because he started storing those 5-gallon jars of honey. So, and you speculate in the book that he was doing it so that he could give it to the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren that he knew he wouldn't get to meet. So on the one hand, it sounds like he also lived with such an acute sense of his own mortality,
He did.
but also hopeful for the future at the same time.
Yeah.
And do you have any of those jars still?
I
Or
do.
were they destroyed in the fire?
I thought they were all destroyed in the fire, and then I'll give it away if anyone hasn't read the end of the book. But my mom was dying, and while my mom was dying, we found one more bucket, like a 5-gallon bucket. So I have one 5-gallon. If any of you come visit me, I will give it to you. I
honey
offer
last
it to
forever?
all of our guests. Yes,
Honey
yeah.
last
I have
forever?
a friend who's a curator at the Met in New York, and I can't wait. She has like shown me photos. I haven't seen them in person yet, but there's honey jars from Egypt where the honey is still good 2,000 years later. The jar labels are still intact. Oh, it's the coolest thing. It's a natural antibiotic. The Egyptians used it as a medicine. And my dad knew all that. Like, he was always lecturing us about, the benefits of honey, But yeah, it's amazing. I did think we lost it. We still have one thing. And the hard part, it's sort of like, what I was saying about balancing the loss with the joy is, part of me doesn't want to use it, right? It's like, it's the last bucket. The other part of me is like, seize the day, like, let's cover ourselves in it. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm trying to use it. But I have to like kind of make myself do it because like, well, what are we saving? What are we saving it for?
Right, but that's a beautiful essay, by the way, like to use it intentionally.
Yeah.
Because it won't last forever, right? So you're just gonna use it when people are sick, as,
Yes.
as something to heal them or
like I'm
you
trying to
just
just
use
put
it
it
up
in my
in your-
coffee before a Zoom meeting because like when you are so precious about it, then I won't use it. Then I have to like tell myself a story of like, is this a meaningful enough occasion?
Yeah.
So I err on that side and then I keep it away and then I'm gonna die and the thing is gonna be there and my nephew's gonna be like, what the hell is this? So I think, there's a balance. Hi. Member of the writing medicine community where we're just discussing. So yeah, no, we have a little bit of honey and I do think honey is a good way to be immortal. I do. I wouldn't have said that before, but
Have you considered burying a jar on the ranch so that someone can find it in 1,000 years?
I'll do it tomorrow.
So there's a piece that will last
Yeah.
forever, even if you put all the rest of your coffee.
I'll do it tomorrow. I gotta figure out like what
Like a time
papyrus they
capsule.
used so that it stayed.
Like a time capsule with a treasure map.
Yeah, but it is a good way. I recommend.
Your book covers so many different types of loss and
Mhm.
layers of loss, right? There's your father's loss of his health and the impact that had on the family, then the loss of your father. There's a divorce that you experienced very young, a significant relationship breakup, the heartbreaking death of your very beloved dog, Cedar. The loss of the access to your emotions is it's a loss in there. I was watching. This is Cole. How do I say your last name, Cole?
And Perry.
Cole Imperi has an amazing TEDx talk that I watched today about something that she calls shadow losses, which are losses that we don't think maybe are as deserving of the time or attention that we give to the death of a person, but that our bodies don't discriminate between different kinds of losses. And so I thought very much of
the loss of your family house in the fire, a divorce, the loss of the access to your emotions as shadow losses. And would you agree?
Totally.
And
Absolutely.
so there's a lot of shadow losses in this book. And I mean, my God, when I list them, I can really appreciate how much you've been through. And I'm wondering what it was like to write about all of these losses. Like, was it emotionally draining? Was it cathartic? Was it a relief? Did you have revelations? What was that experience like for you? Because I teach writing about loss. And
Yeah.
it's, it's intense. It requires us to go back and to dial back and, re-inhabit those moments.
It does. And I had to, because I'm someone who for a very long time was overwhelmed or like tried to push away negative feelings or sort of anesthetize them with work or success or the pursuit of excellence, however I was defining it in the moment. I had to override that to write this. And a lot of what I had to do was like kind of sensory. Like I spent a lot of time like listening to like top 40 hits and like from 1994 and 1996 and 1997, which is a joy. I love 90s hip hop. So it wasn't that painful to go back. But I did a lot. I like found a jar of my dad's cologne on eBay and some of his tobacco and some other things like that to kind of parachute me back in time to be able to do it. Mm-hmm. And writing about the fire was particularly hard. Writing about the loss of my dog was hard. Writing about some of the ends of relationships wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. Like, it was more funny. Like, and if any of you have Tindered in the last 10 years, like, you too should write a memoir. Yeah, you do, to do a good job, I think. Like, my favorite writing is writing that happens like on every plane. So like you were inside someone's body, you feel things through their skin, wherever the narrator is, you taste things, you hear with their ears. And to do that, I think like you really do have to bring all of your senses into the thing. And if what you're writing about is hard, then yeah, like I cried a lot writing this. And I would never say that writing is therapeutic, because writing is the hardest thing that I do and I torture myself with it. But also, I think I created this kind of space for myself where I could relive moments I had been so scared of when they were happening that I parachuted out of myself. So I think writing in an embodied way, or writing in scenes, and a lot of this I kind of wrote in present tense and then went back through when I realized like present tense wasn't going to work for the book. But when you write in present tense, I do think it makes things like feel so much more immediate. And so that opened me up in a way. I mean, I was so shut down as a 16-year-old, I couldn't have written this. But as like a 35-year-old imagining my 16-year-old self, I kind of got a do-over. I think that's a really cool thing that you get to do as a writer. My favorite, I write about this a little bit in the book, but my favorite movie as a kid was Neverending Story. And it's a little on the nose for any of us who are creative as adults, right? Like, it's this boy whose mom has just died, and he goes into a bookstore, my heaven, right? And like picks up a book, and he gets to go inside of it, and he gets to rewrite the ending and be the hero of the story, all using his imagination. Does he bring his dead mom back? No, but he finds his people. Like, he uses his own ability to make stories to make himself safe and get back at the bullies. Like that was just still my like number one fantasy. Sexual or otherwise. And so I think like that's this thing we get to do as writers, which is really freaking cool, And I don't think you have to be like a writer by trade to do that. I think any of us can go back in time and parachute into a moment in our lives we want to re-experience and do it again.
I think it must have taken a lot of courage to go back though and do the kind of self-excavation that this book required of you, or asked of you, or that you were willing to do. I mean, once you gave yourself permission to grieve, it feels like it may have opened the door for you to then, go into that space and really sort of excavate and see what was in there. At the Motherless Daughters retreats that I lead, we spend a lot of time talking about how coping strategies that we develop as children to get through the death of a parent they help us survive back then, so yay little you did what you needed to grow up and go out into the world and be a highly functioning human being. But sometimes those strategies lose their utility, and not only do they stop working, but sometimes they start working against us or harming us. And I
sense that in the book, you talking about that, especially in your relationships. So I was wondering, like, what was your coping strategy that you feel like stopped working for you? And when did you realize it was no longer serving you?
Ooh, I had a kind of breaking point, mid-30s. My coping strategy, was something that I got rewarded for, which I'm sure is true with many of the people that you work with. I wish I had gone to a motherless daughter's retreat earlier. When your coping strategy is to not feel whatever difficult feelings you have and instead chase shiny prizes or work hard or get
Overperform.
good grades, overperform, then every adult around you is like, oh, Laurel's doing great, right? Like, this kid is great, nothing to see here, they're doing fine. You actually get rewarded for your coping strategy. And I'm not saying it was the worst coping strategy. Like, I could have been self-harming in a totally different kind of way, but I do now look at kids differently who are doing quite well in school. That, like, we don't talk about that as like a cry for help, right? But now my students today, like many of them, that is also their cry for help. They've been rewarded their life long. Now they're in medical school. They've been like, well, how did I get here? Like, what do I do with this negative feeling? So I think that's also why I feel comfortable working with healthcare professionals, right? Like a lot of us have used this strategy. So I got to a point in my 30s where, like, I kind of gone down the list of all the things that all the things that particularly my dad had sort of laid out for me, or I thought he laid out for me, a kind of metaphysical to-do list, like go study aquarium fish in the Amazon basin, like get a PhD at MIT, write a New York Times bestseller, like all of these things that I did. And I was like 35 and I'd done them all. And I hurt and I just didn't understand. And I think intellectually, I never would have said that all of those things would have brought him back. But I think in my heart, I did believe that. Or that somehow, if I like checked off all the things on the list, that I would experience love in a new way,
Right.
or I would feel safe. And I just didn't.
Yeah.
And that overlaps with a relationship with my girlfriend, who is now my best friend. But at the time we were dating and it was so painful and I just couldn't make it work. And I write a lot about this in the book, but it was like number 20 relationship in 9 months. And I mean, that's fine if that's what you want, but it's not what I thought I wanted. And I just couldn't let anyone love me. And I really couldn't be loved in a way by anyone that was going to be good for me. And I was in the middle of this really like messy breakup with a woman that I loved. And that's when I found out about this grieving support programs for bereaved kids. And I heard of This American Life episode about it on the radio and I pulled over the car and called the local one and asked if I could be a kid in their program. And the woman was like, that's super creepy. You are in your mid-30s. No, you cannot do this, but maybe you should consider being a facilitator because they get to do all the same activities as the kids. And so that's a big part of the book, which is like sort of that pivot from the like bereaved kid in the adult body that doesn't even know that that's what's happening to being someone that's like, oh, damn it. Like we have some stuff to look at and I guess we're going to spend the next 10 years trying to figure this the hell out. But as such as life, like it doesn't stop, right? Like it's not like, you get a protected period of time to think about your laws. That's not life. If life is anything, it's like a buffet of opportunities to test your coping strategies. So that's what kept happening. So I, with everything, new thing that happened, I just sort of tried to figure out how to apply what I was learning to varying degrees of success.
And by the time, and this is kind of a spoiler alert because we're talking about your family's house burning.
Oh yeah.
Sorry about that, everybody. But it is a really important moment that your book is one of the important moments that your book is working to. I won't give away some of the others. But by the time you get there, you do seem to have access to those emotions. Like you have worked through, you have, again, no spoiler alerts, but you have done some pretty remarkable and large things in the wilderness to get to a point where you can access those emotions. Yes, so I was wondering if you would read just a couple pages.
Sure.
Do you know, were you able to isolate the
Yes,
ones
I think
that
they're actually
love?
the same in your version of my
Oh,
version, which is
good,
kind of
because I
shocking.
thought, the writing is so beautiful. I want people here to hear it so that they'll be inspired to read it themselves too.
Thank you. Thank you. Remind me where you wanted me to stop. From.
I thought maybe from there to there.
Okay, perfect. Once Jake, my younger brother, gave me a book about surviving disasters. How hard it is for people to react decisively in the moment because what's happening doesn't match anything that's ever happened to them before. They mill around or act weirdly normal when they should be running for their lives. During 9/11, one woman walked in circles around her office in the second tower, trying to decide which of her paperback novels to bring with her down the stairs. Or, in so many plane crashes, people see smoke and fire, but instead of racing for the exits, they stop to get their suitcases out of the overhead bins, because that's what we've always done. The authors called it normalcy bias. I looked at the smoking rubble in front of us, knowing that every object I cared about was now turned to ash, and wondered if this was why Mom hadn't gotten anything but her jewelry from the house, why she couldn't hear me begging and pleading with her to take more. A parade of all the things Dad built or made for us marched behind my eyes. My walnut jewelry box, a wooden chair, the jars and buckets of honey, the napkin in Mom's top dresser drawer of the stick figure family Dad drew for her like a contract before his leg was amputated. The rug I wove in Rock Point, the turquoise pin, all my books and photo albums, 20 plus years of notes and letters from Kath and Layla and my other high school friends, Mom's wedding dress. The house was like a person she couldn't believe might die. And by the time she saw that it could, there wasn't time. Maybe instead of normalcy bias, it should be normalcy hope. The process of trying to make the comprehensible world match up with one that exists in our minds, and then refusing to acknowledge that it never will. The weirdest thing, or one of them anyway, was that less than 20 feet from the house, our wooden patio chairs and tables sat in a circle beside the swimming pool, totally untouched, as if ready for a luncheon. Nearby, my blue nylon camping hammock hung between two burnt avocado trees, swinging back and forth in the breeze, totally unharmed. We have a camping hammock, but no house? I asked, incredulous. Yes, Mom said. We also have a stack of firewood. She nodded at another wood pile near the chimney that was also untouched, even though it was feet from where a bank of windows had melted. I laughed my darkest laugh and thought of Dad. He'd think this was funny too. Thankfully, the fire also spared the chicken coop. I wondered what it had been like for the ladies, which is what we called them. But when we walked past, we saw them pecking and cooing as if it were a normal morning. Mom lifted one of the latches on their nesting boxes. My Lord, she said, and held up a light brown egg. We all laughed again and then started coughing because our throats were raw from the smoke and fumes. And it's not cooked, she said, shaking it lightly by her ear. At sunset, we went to her good friend Myrna's house in East Ventura. She'd evacuated, but she told Mom where she had hidden a key in case we needed somewhere to go. I went into the guest bathroom to take a shower and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was smudged with ash and my hair was so heavy with soot it felt like rope. I didn't want to shower because now my outsides matched my insides. Once I washed and changed, they never would again.
The final question before we open for, which comes out right out of this section, because you said, you knew what your dad would laugh at too, that he would find it funny that the firewood was spared. What do you think your dad would think about this book?
Oh, God. Well, one thing I read about, it's not really a spoiler, but one of his last gifts to me was a pen to use to sign my first book someday because he knew I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. And I don't think he would be surprised that I became a writer. He would have been like, well, yeah, that's what I expected of you.
Would he be surprised you wrote about the family?
Yes. He wanted me to write spy novels. He was like so into like Tony Edelman, like all the dad books of the 80s. Like that was his jam. Or like John Grisham. Like he wanted me to be like a diehard spy novel writer, like maybe be in the Secret Service. Like he really loved the idea of me like, knowing how to shoot a gun and wear Kevlar. I know it's probably what a lot of good dads wish for their daughters in America. Just to self-protect. But yeah, no, I think, he'd be a little skeptical I'd shared our family business with the world, but I also think whatever, he knew he was raising a writer. He did. So I think if I've made one person feel slightly less alone in what they're experiencing, I think he would be proud. That's the truth.
Well, I think we have time to open up for some questions. We've got about 20 minutes. Does anyone have any questions for Laurel or anything that you want to share with either of us?
Your own
We
experience.
can just open it up to some conversation.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing. I feel like I'm at an auction, like calling in by proxy, but my friend went to high school with your little brother, so he says hello, Trevor McBride.
Oh, I love Trevor.
And I was wondering if you have a way of memorializing traditions of your parents or what that practice looks like for you.
Great question. Well, we did the first breakfast of the worlds with my nephews a couple of months ago, and my husband was a journalist for many years in the Middle East and lived in Yemen, and Yemen is a place that's very close to his heart. He had to leave during the war, and so Yemen was the first country we decided to do for my nephews, and it was great. They ate Yemeni beans and wore the flag and or waved the flag, and we identified it on a map, and they had requested Mexico next because all they want is hot chocolate and churros. They're like, we've had enough of Middle Eastern breakfast. Like they're all under 8, but I'd say, we do that. And then I'm sort of shocked, it's not something you see in the US as much as you do in lots of other places, but like my brother and my life, like we run the ranch now together with our spouses. My nephews are growing up in the same place that I did. A lot of my daily life, I don't have my pilot's license, but a lot of my daily life is a lot like my parents' life. And I think, I think about them every day. Like today I was working on the irrigation before I put on the lipstick and came down. So I think in a lot of ways I have the same kind of life that they did. And I take comfort in that. I take care of the same trees they planted. There's a lot of comfort in that for me. And I'd say it's in the land. Is how we do it. And my nephews know which trees we planted or they planted or that my parents planted. So we try to keep it alive that way. And I, they may not want to live this life. It's hard. Our water's getting more expensive. We've rebuilt after the fire, but we're not going to be able to afford to rebuild again if the fire burns the houses down again. So, I don't know how sustainable it is, but I'd say we memorialize them how we can. And it's daily in like a practical way. Oh, and we spread my mom's ashes by crop duster. Is it true? Oh, we had to mix her with a 10-pound bag of gold medal flour because like a human is not that much to see from a plane. And so that was a very funny one we did. Instead of having a kind of memorial for her, her really good friend is who we work with to spray the trees. And so he just like took her up and we had our friends over and spread her over the orchard out of the plane, which I think she would have approved of. So that was another example. Other questions? Yeah, cool.
So when you were writing the book, like thinking about where you were in relationship and the relationship you had with all of your losses before you started writing the book versus it's done, did you change in your relationship with your losses through this process of putting this out there?
Big question. I don't know, but I will say it's really cool these days. Like and maybe some of you or some of those people, I don't know yet because you haven't introduced yourself yet. But every time I like open Instagram, like there's a message from someone. It's like, I lost my dad when I was 12, and then I lost my mom 2 years ago, and I too was working in this, or I lost my child a few months ago, and this is what I'm thinking about, or here's where I am on my journey. And that's cool. Like I'd say my relationship to my own losses hasn't changed, but the beautiful thing that happens, even if you have a book that 10 million people are reading, is that enough people are reading that they write you about it. And you are not alone, which I think I've just wanted since I was 3. To be around other people. They're like, oh my God, you too? This sucks. Also like, let's go get a drink. Like that. Like to be in it with other people is the cool thing, I'd say.
Thank you. You're absolutely effervescent. What looks like bravery is the title. Not yet read the book, but not once did the word bravery emerge today. And so I'm curious I read maybe some skepticism about the word bravery in the title. I read more, a hint at questions of vulnerability, who gets to be vulnerable, what that looks
Yeah.
like. So can you speak to us about your relationship to the word bravery? I ask because also this iPad's been scrolling some book titles, and one is like "Women are the fiercest creatures." I'm skeptical about like being fierce.
Yeah.
So can you talk to us about what bravery is?
Great
for you?
question. Thank you for asking that. Yes, I am skeptical. Not that I don't think bravery is a thing, but for a long time, as Hope was referring to, I did a lot of things where I was kind of anesthetizing my fear and my negative feelings, particularly about myself or how I had let down people I loved, or my dad and my last experience with each other was a fight. I hung up on him, and I really did spend decades kind of hurling myself like spaghetti at the world and at hard things. And like when I was 18, I moved to the Amazon basin, and I spent a few years on riverboats by myself in the Amazon. And, I was in Alaska studying grizzly bears, and I was doing so much. And I would come back home and I would see like my parents' friends or something and be like, wow, Laurel, you're so brave, And I knew the truth. Like, I knew that, like, well, these things were challenging, but like, so what? Like, I got dysentery, you know what I mean? Or like, so what? I couldn't watch TV for a little while. Like, what was really scared me was feeling my own difficult feelings. And that no one talked about as being brave. And no one talked, culture is changing. But certainly in my world, I was being rewarded for these things that outwardly seemed brave and that I knew was just me trying to do something else. And so it comes from a line in the book that sometimes what looks like bravery is just us being scared of something else even more. And so for me, what took bravery was so quiet and internal and a little bit different.
So thank you for all this. It's really interesting, and I'm not sure how I'm going to say what I'm going to say. So I'm not sure my question is, and now I'm feeling vulnerable. But I think you are brave, because those things are really brave to do, coming from someone who, I lost my mom when I was 10, and my dad then 6 years ago in a car accident, and my mom in another tragic way. And so vulnerability is my bravery.
Yeah,
But adventure is more scary.
totally.
So, I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. I think that the energy and spirit of it is brave, and it is accomplishment, and there's nothing to take away from that, just because maybe it's scarier to go. Everyone has a coping mechanism, and everyone has a different soul and life path. I guess that's what I wanted to say. And
Beautifully said.
So are you saying that, it's not binary, both things can be true? It can be brave to go to the
it's
Amazon
100%
for 3 years.
brave to live
And it
in the
can also
Amazon.
be,
It's
a
100%
cover up
brave.
for fear. Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
as being super vulnerable can be a cover up for being afraid to do the adventure.
Thank you
and
for
put
that.
yourself out in the world. That I'll just be vulnerable, and that's my comfort zone.
That's amazing.
So yeah, it's absolutely my comfort zone. So it's interesting.
Thank you for that. On a much lower level, my first daughter was born in a hospital, and there were some things that happened there that were less than ideal. And so for my second daughter, I refused to go back to a hospital. So I did a home birth, and everybody said, "You're so brave. You gave birth at home." And I said, brave would have been going back to the hospital for me. Like I said, I refuse to leave my bedroom. What's brave about that? But only over time could I say, it's not binary. Yeah, that was kind of badass.
Yeah.
I gave birth in my bed.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was because I was scared of doing it any other way. And that just, in my assessment, sort of like the cost benefit analysis that we do in the background software of our minds, you're probably thinking, well, going to the Amazon is less scary than staying home and dealing with my feelings.
Feeling like maybe I'm bad, or maybe that I let down someone that I love. Like I 100%. I think every bravery is personal.
Yes.
right?
so
Like there's
interesting.
no, that's why I very rarely tell people that I think they're being brave at this point, because I'm like, well, I don't know what your version is.
I saw one other parallel. I don't know your book or the timeline or when you lost your mom. But what I found interesting was the fire is chaotic. You don't know where it goes. And as was your father's illness, it sounds like it like diagnosis, but then it, you didn't know when, like versus mine were like died.
Right.
And so there seems to be some metaphor in that, I don't know.
Well, and you didn't know where your dad's cancer would show up next either, because he had a kind of cancer that kept showing up in different places, or were those different primaries?
It was, just different Mets, but I like different recurrences in different parts of your body. But I think like anyone who has to live in a liminal space for whatever reason, it's the same kind of feeling, but like you're waiting for an axe to fall. I think it can be.
But you spent 13 years of formative development in that liminal space.
Yeah,
right?
like
and
the
your
quickest
personality
place.
shaped around it, I
Yeah.
think, right? Your brain development was
Yeah,
occurring in that atmosphere or that environment.
I think about it like the infernal waiting room of the gods, and it can come from a medical context, but it can come from anything. Like that's like early dating. Had a real hard time with that. Like, won't they text you back moment? Like to me, felt like waiting for someone to call with scan results. And anytime I'm stuck in that place, like I immediately, that's my hardest place to live in. Like I can deal with the bad news, just tell me the bad news, right? It's like when you're kind of waiting for that phone call, like that is the exquisite pain for me.
Yeah, the not knowing.
The not knowing. And that, unfortunately, that's like every romantic comedy, like a lot of our culture is set up in that place. Like that's the good tension in a novel. That's a good, but for me, I'm just like, well, let's get this shit done. I need to know how it ends, but I'm trying to be better. It's cool. There can be fun stuff that happens in there too.
I do think that putting a memoir out into the world is an act of courage, though, especially now, going out in the world, braving your soul, talking about really personal things when everyone can be a reviewer and anyone can contact you or find you. I mean, I started writing in the 90s and we didn't have citizen reviewers. There were certain book reviewers and radio programs that you'd go on. And it was hard for readers to find you. They had to write you a letter care of the publisher.
Wow.
Before authors had websites and all of that. I mean, it makes me sound, completely archaic.
No.
But there was a certain kind of like protection, like
Yeah.
self-protection there, because you wouldn't be pummeled with everybody's opinion.
Yeah, totally.
Like the day after your book comes out. And it's a
Yes.
completely different publishing environment now.
It's true. I live with the like, I don't know if you feel this way now, but the like, look at me, don't ever look at me. It's like, pay attention, review, like me, push the heart, whatever it is at the moment, and then I'm like, God, it's both. Like, I want everyone to stop what they're doing and like read about me, like making my Barbies have sex. And then I don't want to know about it, like it's both. It's terrible. But yeah, I fantasize about what it must have been like then. We're like, yeah, you just didn't immediately have access to like, oh, this is what this author had for breakfast this morning. Or like, I don't really like this dumb thing they just said on Twitter. Like now I don't think about the book the same way. Like authors were like imaginary characters in a way now that they're not. For better or worse. Like I kind of want to know the politics
We were a
of someone
little
I'm
bit
reading.
mysterious. And now we're not,
Yeah.
because again, you can go to our Instagram feed and see what we had for dinner last night.
Yeah, exactly. Or like,
This
or
is
the
really
photos.
weird. I wrote Hope a letter, and I don't even know if you remember, but I wrote you a letter about motherless daughters, and I sent you a short story that I had just had published.
I do
And
remember
you
that.
wrote me back.
Awesome.
Yeah. Did you send it by mail?
That's what I
Or
don't
by
remember.
email? I know, I think it might have come by an early email, but yeah, it was a long time ago. Long time ago.
Yeah, back when we didn't. Yeah, I
I know.
didn't know what you had for dinner.
No. Yeah, pre-Instagram.
Yeah, definitely.
Are there any more questions for Laurel? Oh, good. Yes.
How is your training as a secular chaplain going, and how did your journey from Animal Madness and Looks Like Bravery lead to that?
My training is unfortunately on pause because I had to leave the Bay Area and move to Southern California and take over family farm with my family. But I'm working on figuring out a way to get local hours to count towards my chaplaincy. And yeah, I don't know. I think I was just amazed. I started going to the ethics meetings at the Stanford Hospital, and I was so blown away by the chaplains and how they spoke about medically complex cases. And they were just so well versed in medicine, and I just really respected them. I mean, I'd say like along with palliative medicine, they were one of the few parts and like eddies of the hospital where people were having really meaningful conversations, and there wasn't a rush, and there was time to kind of help people figure out what they wanted. And the good chaplains were mirrors or windows as opposed to guiding the conversation. I was amazed. And also I just really wanted a name tag that said spiritual care on it. I thought that was the best name tag I've ever seen in my life. That could be like something you were called officially, was spiritual care. So I love it. And I think clinical chaplains are my heroes. Are you a chaplain?
No, I'm a veterinarian.
Ah, amazing.
You're still at Stanford though.
I am. And I think veterinarians, no one asked me about what my books have in common. I think many people think they're just very, very different. My first book was about animal emotional lives, and particularly mental illness and how we understand suffering in ourselves and other creatures and how those things relate, and the various things that can help us all feel better. And I think this work is the same. And when I am wandering around the hospital, I think some of veterinarians have come to writing medicine because I love putting veterinarians in among human physicians. I think it's marvelous. You guys have to know 50 different physiologies or hundreds. So
if you have the fortitude for it, I hope you can visit the Department of Laboratory Medicine underground at Stanford.
Oh, I would love to. I do have the fortitude. I absolutely do. And I think when we look away because we think we're going to have an emotionally difficult experience, there is a huge loss. Because I think we need precisely the people who are worried that they will be disturbed to be in those places, and also to see the humanity of the people that work there. 100%.
What lab is that?
The animal lab at Stanford School of Medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So test
Testing
animals,
on
animal testing, yeah, which people have very strong opinions about. And I think as a rule, I think we should do much less of it, and certainly not for cosmetic reasons and everything else. But many of these labs are full of people who got into it because they wanted to protect animals and have big hearts, and then have kind of realized that the system is bigger than them and are trying to do what they can. So anyway.
Did
Very
you say
interesting.
mental illness in animals?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Like as they get older?
Yes, animals can get dementia.
I'm worried about my dog.
Yeah, does your dog go into rooms and suddenly sort of look confused, like, why am I here?
She doesn't do that just yet, but she's just really bossy. But she does like pant. She's 11 and a half shepherd. And so, yeah. Anyway,
Well, you should
I'm
talk
okay.
to him. I'm not a professional, I just write about it, but
Your book though paved the way for the bestseller behind you, Ed Young's Immense World.
I love that book. And I love Ed Young. I think he's so
You
good.
said it first before him.
I did, but what are you gonna do? He's at least a really good guy,
Are there any other questions for Laurel? Yes.
I can't let go of the idea of you writing a spy novel.
Oh.
And
Teach me.
Just the thought of you creating a protagonist that finds herself in a spy novel, I can't wait for that. Because I'm just like, because the protagonist that you're going to create with all of this stuff would end up in a different kind of spy novel, and I would be very excited to read that.
Oh my God, well, thank you. That's all I want to do next. I wish I was someone that could like do a book and then now that I've taught myself how to write a memoir, write another memoir, but I don't know. All I want to do now is write fiction. I truly want to write a queer Western. But who knows? Who knows?
Rawhide Kid, it's a comic book.
Oh.
It was started in the late 50s, early 60s by Jack Kirby, and then sometime around the early 2000s, they gayified him.
Ooh. Rawhide Kid.
Rawhide Kid.
Rawhide Kid. All right. It's a small genre. Got Outlawed and a few other good books, but
Queer Western spy novel.
yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
We'll set it in the animal,
We can do
in the
research
Stanford
into
Animal Lab.
So,
All right, well, Laurel, thank you so much for
Thank you
sharing your time with us, your experience with us, your creativity with us. Everyone, please consider buying Laurel's book if you haven't already. You will not be disappointed. She's going to be here signing copies that you purchased today and talking with you one-on-one for a while. So I'm going to hand it over to Laurel and to the bookshop, and thank you for hosting.
yes.